My name is Meg Powers, and this is task number 1 for VETT 221. So I'm here at the oxygen storage closet. I'm just going to turn the camera around so you can see our tanks. All right, so you can see here that we have our oxygen tanks. The oxygen tanks are green. So this is our oxygen source here that feeds the whole building. We do always have 2 tanks hooked up at all times. So this one you can see is the one we have in use, and then we have a backup one that is full. So the oxygen source goes here, it connects. You can see here we have our oxygen pressure gauges, and you can see right here. So a normal tank is usually at 2,200. You can see here we're about at the 2,000, just a little under. So this tank is full and we do not need to worry about turning on the backup tank. You can also see here we have our pressure regulator. So what this does is the pressure in the tanks is higher. So this regulator makes it so it's a lower pressure at 50 psi as it's entering the main system here, which goes up into our ceiling and then throughout the hospital. This right here is an emergency shutoff valve. If for some reason you needed to immediately shut off oxygen to the entire hospital, you would just run in here and flip that valve, and that would shut down the oxygen going throughout our entire hospital. So now we're going to head on over to our anesthesia machine, and we're just going to swing by the button that shows, or the switch rather, that shows our scavenger is on. So let me just, so over here we have our little switch. Oops. So it's on right now, and you can see that the light is on as well. So that's our scavenger system. So that way in the morning when you turn on oxygen, you want to turn on the scavenger just so that's ready for the day. We'll go over the scavenger system in just a bit, but that is how we know that it has been turned on. All right, so we went over the source, which was the green tanks and the gauges on there. So then that feeds through our building and comes here. We're currently in the dental suite, and we are just going to go over our anesthesia machine. So the first part we have here is our flow meter. So the oxygen is coming from the main system here. The tank into the main system, the pressure has already been reduced to 50 psi. And this flow meter is going to reduce that pressure even further. It is measured in liters per minute. And just to show you that that is working, just turn that there. The bobble stays nice and steady, it doesn't fall. If you notice it's falling, then you're probably running out of oxygen or low on oxygen and you need to switch over the tank. To turn that off, you just turn it until the ball falls. You don't want to over tighten that because you could strip it and you could cause damage to that piece of equipment. The next thing we have, I'm just gonna put you back down. We have our oxygen flush right here. So what I'm gonna do, I think you can see the bag as well. So what you're going to do for the oxygen flush is just cover that. When you hit the button, you'll see the bag filling. So that just flushes. So that is flushing pure 100% oxygen. It's going to bypass the flow meter and the vaporizer and go directly to your bag. So you're going to want to be really careful because if you have a patient hooked up, all that pressure would go right to them and you're going to overinflate their lungs and cause serious damage. So if you ever have to hit that button to flush the system, you need to make sure your patient is not attached to this tube. So you may want to flush it if, say, there's too much gas in the system, your patient's getting too deep and they just need more oxygen and less gas. You could always flush the gas out of your system using this valve here, and then you can reattach your patient at the appropriate amount of anesthesia. And you are also going to use that just when you are leak pressure checking your machine. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, just put it down, move you here. All right, so here is our vaporizer, which again, I'm going to bring it in real quick so you can see oops, there you go. So you can see that here's the full line, and we are just below the fill line. All right, so for this is our vaporizer. As you saw, it was full. So what this does is you're gonna turn your liquid anesthetic, here we use isoflurane. It's gonna convert that liquid into a gas anesthesia that your patient can breathe. When you want to refill it, you're gonna untwist this and just use, we use a pour spout to just kind of fill this up after procedures or when it's getting low. And then also there's a little divot in the top that actually fits on a post. So if you were to open this up, in the middle there's a post. This fits right on top. If you were to turn that, that's how you can drain all the gas out of this unit. For example, if it had to go off to be repaired, you don't want to ship it with anesthesia inside. So in that case, you would want to drain that. I'll just show you real quick the kind of divot we were talking about. So then our next part, we have this machine, we have our scavenging machine. It is attached here. So this is gonna take our waste anesthetic gases and it's going to scavenge. So here we have an active scavenger. So that uses a vacuum and a fan. So if you were to unplug this, it's actually the attachment's in the ceiling, which I'll show when we go over everything else with how this works. If you were to unplug this from the ceiling, if you were to put your hand over that empty hole, you would feel suction. So that's how you know your scavenger is pulling that waste anesthetic gas away from your circuit. And here we have our reservoir bag. So this here, when you attach this, it's gonna reflect the capacity of your patient's lungs. So for example, if you have a patient that's breathing and your bag keeps collapsing, chances are your bag is not large enough. So pretty much the capacity in this bag needs to reflect the capacity of your patient's lungs. And you can calculate that by taking their weight in pounds, timesing that by 30. That will tell you the milliliter capacity, and then you just pick the liter bag that corresponds to that and is appropriate. So when you're using the bag, you're gonna be using it to give, when you're manually bagging the patient, to give them breaths. And then you're also gonna use this when you're doing your leak check for the machine. All right, and then, so here, again, kind of hard to see. So here's our CO2 canister. Let me move you. So there's our canister there. So what that does, it absorbs the CO2 in your system, and that just, when you need to change the pellets, there's a few different ways to tell. So this canister, these white pellets will turn a purple color, and then you know that the pellets need to be changed. However, that's not the most reliable way to tell, only because if you leave the purple pellets sitting for a really long time, they will go back to that white color. That purple color will kind of fade. So that's not a super reliable way to tell if you need to change your pellets. Another thing that we do here is we log the runtime. So I'll just show you really quickly. This here is machine number 1 in this dental suite. Let me just turn you around actually, so you can see it better. All right, so up here, machine number 1, you can see, let me just move my Mayo stand. It corresponds to canister number 1. And over here, we have a log. So this is also for machine number 1, and I changed the pellets today. Another thing you can do is you can take the canister off, and you can use your fingers and crumple the pellets, and they should have, which I can do for you here. I just need to put on my mask and gloves because it is an inhalation irritant, and it can, you don't want it to get on your hands. So what you can do, I'm just gonna put on my mask and gloves, and we're just gonna kind of crumble the pellets. If the pellets are really hard and you can't crumple them, then it means it is time to change those. All right, and while I'm getting ready, also you can see here, this is our manometer, and that is reflective of the pressure in the lines. Or within the system, rather. So I'm asking. I'm just gonna step around to the other side. To untwist this. So here you have your granules. You just pick them up, just a couple. Oops. Kind of, you can see them, hopefully you can see they're kind of crumpling into smaller pieces as you kind of go there. Let's retouch that. Okay, so I'm going to take this off so I don't get the Sotazorb dust all over the place. Okay, and then while we're here, you can see that we have, so we already went over the manometer. Here we have the inhalation and the exhalation valves. I'm going to, you can tell they're working because you're going to see them fluttering. So let me just cover my tube and flush, and hopefully you can see them. So they are moving, but I don't think the camera's picking it up. But so put it back. All right, and then here we have our tubing. This is an F tube, and this is going to connect to our patient. They are part of your breathing circuit. And then, let's see, here is our pop-off valve. So you always want to leave your pop-off valve open. The only time you're going to close it is when you're doing a leak check for your machine, or if you need to give a manual breath to your patient. However, I know some machines you have to completely close the valve to give your breath, and this machine has this little button here. So you just push that down when you're giving your breath, and that blocks off the system. And then the second you take your finger off, the system's back open, which is a really good feature to have for safety, because if you were to leave the pop-off valve closed completely and you had a patient attached, it would cause a buildup in pressure and you could do serious damage to their lungs. So I think we've gone over everything on the machine. I'm going to flip the camera around and kind of walk you through from start to finish how the oxygen flows from our closet to our machine here. So let me just get situated. Oops. Move my Mayo stand. Okay. So you can see here, our oxygen comes from the ceiling, and we have ports here in the wall. We also, if you want to move your anesthesia machine, have ports in the ceiling, which is actually where our scavenger is connected. So we go oxygen from the wall to our machine here. So here to our machine. Then you can see it connects here to our flow meter. And you can also see here, it goes over, if you were to use the flush valve, this is the bypass. So you can see it goes here and it bypasses that way. So then from the flow meter, you go here to our vaporizer. The vaporizer, you can see comes here. It does connect where here, this is the shared part. So this would be the flush valve, but then here is our vaporizer coming in. We are using the rebreather system, so we're hooked up here, and that is going over to our inhalation valve, which is right here. So then from here, it's going to go in to your patient. So this will be attached to the patient. So this is your patient right here. It goes from the inhalation through the tube to your patient. They're gonna breathe in. When they exhale, it's gonna come back and go, it's gonna come back and go here through the exhalation valve to our pop-off valve, and then our scavenger system. So let me just show you. We have this blue tube. It goes here. It goes to that white cord, which we're gonna follow, or sorry, the clear hose rather. Gets a little, it's extremely long. And then it goes there. So also on our machine, I should mention, we do have in the back, those little e-tanks. So if something happened, which is extremely unusual since we do have the double tanks in the closet hooked up at all times. Previously, before we had that system, we would only have one tank hooked up at a time in the closet. If for some reason you ran out of oxygen, you would have to unhook that first tank and then hook up a second one. So in that kind of intermediate time, you didn't want your patient just not to be on oxygen. So we do have e-tanks that are attached to the back. So if for some reason your tank ran out and the second tank was also empty because someone forgot to change it, someone would call out like, hey, the tanks are empty, turn on your e-tanks. So then you would know to turn those on, and then your machine can run from those little e-tanks until the main source of oxygen is back in place. So let me just show you, these e-tanks do have their own pressure gauges. So currently they're off. So it thinks it's empty, but then you have this little key and you can turn it on. So I think that just about covers it for our machine, and it does appear that everything is attached and hooked up and working properly. So that concludes this task 1.